When I walked into my parents' house, I froze. My mother's voice drifted from the dining room, calm, almost proud. My sister's kids eat first, and Selena's boys can wait for the crumbs. My sibling laughed. My father didn't even look up. In the corner, my children sat with empty plates balanced on their knees, trying to act like they weren't hungry. My chest tightened, but inside, everything went still. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I simply took my boys and walked out. What they didn't know, what none of them sensed, was that the moment they pushed my children into that corner, they pushed themselves somewhere far worse. Yes, I am Selena. And if I'm being honest, the scene in my parents' dining room didn't come out of nowhere. It was just the first time their hierarchy became so undeniable, so loud, that even my silence couldn't protect me from it. The truth is, the pattern began years before my boys Jalen and Theo were even born. When I was 17, still working my first part-time job, my mother, Ellen, a woman who always sounded one step away from a crisis, asked if I could help a little with groceries. My father, Harold, practical to the point of coldness, nodded and said it would teach responsibility. $20 there, $50 here, and before I understood what was happening, giving became a reflex. A habit, then an obligation. By the time I was in college, they were sending me pictures of bills notes about repairs, and when I'd call to ask if everything was okay, my mother's voice always quivered in just the right places. I didn't see it then, but looking back, it was choreography performed worry, perfectly timed. When I graduated and landed my first full-time job, the requests changed tone. They weren't "could you help" anymore. They became "we really need you." Dental work for my father, a broken appliance, a car issue. It always arrived as an emergency, urgent, unavoidable, and somehow always aligned with the weeks my paycheck deposited. And then came Vanessa, my older sibling. She was the one my parents bragged about. The one whose kids Lily and Caleb were always invited, always praised, always framed as the normal ones. When her car broke down, I helped with repairs. When she needed a boost with insurance, I covered that too. I told myself it was temporary. Family helps family, right? But when I got married to Darius, my husband a patient, steady man who saw more than I ever did, the imbalance sharpened. He'd ask, "Do they ever offer to help us?" I'd laugh it off. They're busy, but every time a holiday came around, every time there was something to celebrate, I noticed the seating arrangements, the invitations, the small moments of distance. Darius would gently step back during family conversations, as if he already understood he wasn't included in the script. And then came the kids. When Jalen was born, my mother held him like he was fragile glass, not precious, delicate, uncertain, as if she didn't quite know where he fit. When Theo arrived 2 years later, my father congratulated us, but his eyes flickered with the same hesitation. I told myself I imagined it. I blamed exhaustion, stress, anything but prejudice. But children feel things adults ignore. Jalen learned early that his cousins got the first turn, the best toys, the biggest slices. Theo picked up on the seating patterns, how Lily and Caleb always sat near the adults while he and Jalen were directed to play in the other room. And every time I felt something tighten in my chest, I convinced myself I was being oversensitive. The requests for money never stopped. They only grew. Mortgage help, medical bills, a sudden roof repair, a mysterious, unexpected expense that always popped up right before holidays. And every time I said yes, believing that generosity would eventually bridge the emotional divide. But it never did. The moment I walked into that dining room, the moment I saw my boys in the corner with empty plates, it wasn't just a shock. It was recognition. Nothing had changed. I had been funding a hierarchy that pushed my children to the edges. I had been financing a family who saw my boys as crumbs, not kin. And standing in that doorway, watching Lily and Caleb eat their second servings while my children stared at nothing, I finally understood. This wasn't a slip. This was the system. One I helped build without ever seeing it clearly. And once that realization settled in my bones, something else rose with it, something still sharp and absolute. I wasn't going to let them overlook my sons ever again. By the time I returned to my parents' house that evening, I thought the worst had already happened, that the humiliation of watching my boys sit in a corner with empty plates was the breaking point. I didn't realize the real trigger was still waiting for me, sitting quietly beneath the surface like a fault line ready to split. When I opened the front door, the house was too calm, the kind of calm that isn't peaceful, just empty. I stepped into the hallway, and that's when I heard it again. My mother, Ellen, the woman who raised me on phrases like family first, was speaking with the same tone she used when justifying anything she didn't want to question. "My sister's kids eat first," she said, "and Selena's boys can wait for the crumbs. It's only practical." My sibling Vanessa, the one who'd always assumed her children belonged at the center of every family moment, gave a small laugh. "It's better they get used to it now," she added. "They were born to live off what's left." And then my father, Harold steady logical, never emotional, closed the circle. "They need to learn their place. That's just how things are." I moved before they even realized I was standing just beyond the doorway. In the dining room's warm light, I could see everything clearly. Lily and Caleb finishing their second servings of pasta, sitting comfortably at the table, while Jalen and Theo, my boys, hovered by the doorway as if waiting for permission to exist. Jalen met my eyes for half a second, and in that look I felt something fracture. He wasn't confused anymore, he understood. He understood exactly where the adults in this house had placed him. That was the moment. Not the crumbs, not the empty plates, not the laughter. It was the look on my child's face, the quiet, shrinking, the practiced acceptance of less that rewired something in me. I knew then that nothing I said inside that house would matter. Words wouldn't fix this. Confrontation wouldn't change them. But systems can be dismantled. Support can be withdrawn. And I, after years of paying for this family's comfort, held the one lever they never expected me to pull. The real trigger wasn't their cruelty. It was my decision in that instant to stop funding it. I didn't slam the door when I left my parents' house that night. I didn't raise my voice or make a scene. I simply placed a hand on each of my boys' backs, guided them toward the car, and buckled them in. The silence between us felt thick, heavy enough to push against my ribs, but I kept my breathing steady for their sake. Children read everything through the smallest cracks in a parent's face. When I pulled into our driveway, Darius, my husband, the man who never missed the shifts in my mood, opened the door before I even touched my keys. One look at me, one look at the boys, and he knew. He didn't ask. What happened, like most people would? He just said gently, "Let's get them settled first." He helped Jalen find his sketchbook. He guided Theo toward the living room couch and put on the nature documentary he loved. Only when they were busy in their small worlds did Darius return to the kitchen, lean against the counter, and wait for me to speak. I didn't know where to start, so I started with the words that hurt the most. "My mother said the cousins eat first," I whispered, "and my kids, my boys, should wait for the crumbs." The muscle in Darius's jaw shifted, but he stayed still. "And my sibling laughed," I continued. My father backed them up. They weren't joking. They meant every word. I expected anger from him, outrage. But instead, Darius breathed out slowly, like he had always known this moment would arrive. "Sit," he said softly. I sat. "Selena," he began, "you've been supporting that entire household for years. Bills, repairs, payments, all of it. And you've never asked what any of that has cost you, not in money, but in dignity. I wanted to defend them the same way I had for years. But nothing came out, because the truth had already been sitting in the back of my throat since the moment Jalen looked at me with those sad, understanding eyes. They don't see our sons as family, Darius said. They see them as a complication. And they see you as the solution they can drain without ever being grateful." I didn't argue. I couldn't. That silence, the one that settled between us, wasn't defeat. It was clarity. He reached across the table and took my hand. So he asked quietly, "What do you want to do?" And just like that, the quiet plan began. I stood up, walked to the drawer where we kept important papers, and pulled out my laptop and a clean legal pad. I'd bought the pad months ago, planning to use it for work notes. It had remained blank until that night. I drew 4 columns: mortgage, auto, utilities, emergencies. Then I opened the banking app I had avoided looking at too closely. I scrolled, page after page of transfers, payments tagged with messages like, "Just until we're caught up," "Family helps family," "We're short this month, it's just temporary." Under each category, I wrote numbers, dates, amounts. The pad filled faster than I expected. When Darius sat beside me, he didn't interrupt. He simply slid a second pen across the table in case I needed it. By midnight, the pattern was undeniable. 8 years of support, structured, steady, almost scheduled. I whispered, "They've built their lives around my income, and they've built their arrogance on it too," Darius replied. I didn't cry. Not because I was strong, but because something colder had settled into my chest. A kind of quiet steadiness I'd never felt before. "I'm done," I said. Darius nodded. "Then let's make a list. First, call the mortgage company." I asked what my options were as a co-borrower. When the agent explained the process for removing my self-refinancing qualification requirements' potential sell-off if they couldn't meet the numbers, I wrote every detail down. Second, call the auto lender. I instructed them to require my authorization for any credit adjustments or refinancing tied to my previous co-signature. Third, the utilities and payments I'd set up during emergencies. I canceled every automatic transfer. Fourth, the savings transfer I'd created years ago as a temporary cushion for my parents. Deleted. Permanently. Fifth, my accountant. I sent an email requesting a full audit of personal support given to extended family over the past 8 years. Sixth, a family lawyer. Not for lawsuits, just for clarity boundaries and documentation. Every step was done quietly. No grand announcement. No confrontation. Just removal. Just the ending of access. Around 2 a.m. after the last account was adjusted, I closed my laptop and set my pen down. The house was silent. Even the refrigerator hum felt distant. Darius placed a mug of warm tea beside me, not as comfort, as anchoring. "Do you feel better?" he asked. "No," I said honestly. "I feel awake." There was no satisfaction, not yet, just a realization. My silence that night, walking out without a word, refusing to plead or argue, had been the first act of power I'd taken in years, and the blueprint I drafted on that legal pad that was power solidified. Every unchecked box on my family's budget, every deposit they expected, every bill waiting for my name. All of it would hit them like a winter storm they never prepared for, not because I wanted revenge, but because I needed protection. For my sons. For my home, for the part of me that remembered what crumbs used to taste like. The quiet plan wasn't emotional. It wasn't explosive. It was administrative, methodical, precise, a quiet rebalancing long overdue. And by dawn, as I watched the first light stretch across our kitchen floor, I realized something they had taught my children to expect less. Now they would learn what happens when I stop giving more. The first sign that my silence had reached them came exactly 48 hours later. I was packing Jalen's art supplies for school when my phone lit up with my father's name. Harold, the man who rarely called unless a payment was late or a new problem had surfaced. "Selena," he said, "without greeting, there seems to be some kind of issue with the mortgage. The transfer didn't go through." I didn't bother sitting down. "There's no issue," I replied. I canceled it. The pause on the other end was sharp, the kind that cuts through a person's certainty. "You canceled it." "Without warning, I warned you," I said quietly. "You just weren't listening." He inhaled like he was steadying himself. "This is your parents' home. We rely on, I know exactly what you rely on. I cut in. That's why it stopped." Before he could respond, another call buzzed in. My sibling Vanessa, who had laughed while my sons sat hungry in a corner, was already spiraling. I picked up. "Selena, what did you do?" she demanded. "My car payment got rejected. They said the cosigner blocked adjustments. You know I can't afford a hit on my credit right now." I leaned against the counter, watching the morning sun land on Theo's cereal bowl. "You'll have to manage," I said. "The way you expect my sons to manage with whatever scraps they're given." That was a misunderstanding. You said I reminded her that my boys were born to live off what's left. Those were your words. Silence, not guilt, just the sound of someone recalculating their losses. Before she could recover my mother, Ellen, the architect of emotional leverage, called through FaceTime. I let it ring twice before answering. Her face appeared tight with panic. "Sweetheart," she began shakily, "your father and I need to talk to you. The bills. Things are piling up faster than we expected. We're in a difficult situation." "Are you?" I said calmly. "You know we depend on that support. It isn't fair to punish us like this." "Punish." The word hung there. "You punished my sons," I said, right in front of me. "That was different," she insisted. "We were being realistic about how the world works." "No," I said. "You were being realistic about how much you thought you could get away with because you assumed I'd always pay." Her expression cracked first confusion, then fear. "Selena, please. We could lose the house. And my children," I said softly, "could have lost their sense of worth if I stayed silent." She flinched. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten. I didn't bargain. I simply laid out the truth in the same steady tone they'd used while ranking grandchildren by normalcy. "The mortgage help won't return," I said. "The automatic transfers are gone. The cushion fund is gone. The co-signing access is locked. From now on, you live on your income like every other adult." "Selena," she whispered, "you can't do this to us." "I'm not doing anything to you," I replied. "I'm stopping what you were doing to my children." Another silence, this one raw, unshielded. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one scrambling to fix the fallout. They were. And somewhere in the background of their panic, urgent shuffling, raised voices, footsteps pacing across hardwood, I heard the beginning of something they never thought they'd feel. Desperation. The same desperation my sons felt sitting in a corner with empty plates. Only this time, the emptiness wasn't on my children's laps. It was in my parents' bank accounts, in their plans, in the security they believed I owed them. Their hierarchy collapsed exactly where it was built on the foundation of my silence. And now, that silence was gone. In the weeks that followed, the fallout settled into place with a quietness that felt almost surreal. There were no dramatic confrontations, no midnight arrivals at my door, no scenes worthy of a family intervention. Instead, everything unfolded the way truth usually does, slow, steady, and impossible to outrun. My parents, Ellen and Harold, who once lived in a house too large for their real needs, moved into a modest apartment on the other side of town. My sibling Vanessa, who used to speak casually about comfort levels and normal-looking families, picked up extra shifts to cover the payments she'd once assumed I'd manage. But in my own home, the air felt lighter. Jalen, my thoughtful 8-year-old, started taking the main seat at our dinner table, the one he used to avoid because that's where guests sit. Theo, always energetic, began talking more, asking questions, telling stories, laughing louder than he ever had at my parents' house. One evening, as I washed dishes after dinner, I watched them through the kitchen doorway. They weren't waiting for permission. They weren't checking adults' faces to see if they were allowed to take seconds. They simply existed comfortable, visible, whole. Darius stood beside me drying plates. "You seem quieter," he said. "I'm not quiet," I answered. "I'm settled." He nodded understanding without needing explanation. The quiet wasn't emptiness anymore. It was space. Space to think. Space to breathe. Space for my children to know that their worth wasn't measured by someone else's hierarchy. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vengeful. I felt aligned with myself, with my boys, with the boundaries I should have drawn years ago. What they lost was comfort. What I gained was clarity. And for the first time in a long time, that balance finally felt right. In the end, it wasn't the money I took back that changed everything. It was the space I reclaimed. The day my parents taught my sons they were meant for crumbs was the day I stopped feeding a system that starved them. Some boundaries break families. Mine simply revealed the truth. My boys don't sit in corners anymore. And I will never apologize for choosing their worth over anyone's comfort, not even my own parents. If this story resonates with you, stay with us. Like, subscribe, and share your own boundary-setting moment below. Your voice might be the spark someone else needs.